Hey, what's going on, guys? Rome Gaming here, back in another video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Ambessa for the top lane. All right, taking a look at some of her most popular builds. So the most popular build is going to be Conqueror, and then taking Resolve as your secondary tree. So Conqueror is going to be pretty good, right, to build up that adaptive force per stack. It's going to be pretty decent for longer trades, and Ambessa is not normally something that you're very bursty with. She does have sort of like an assassin build that you can do right now, but for the most part, you're kind of building her more as a bruiser than an assassin. So Conqueror is going to give her some of that sustained damage. So going down into some of the other nodes, we have Triumph here. It's going to be very good on a takedown to restore some of that missing health and mana. We also have Legend Haste. So we get more haste on our ability. She's a very ability-focused champion. So you want as much, I guess you could say CDR on those abilities as you can. And then finally, we'll be taking Last Stand. Then going into the Resolve tree, we'll be taking Second Wind for the additional lane sustain, and then we'll be taking Overgrowth for some of the scaling that comes with it as the game kind of progresses. Then your final runes here will be Adaptive Force into Health. So under spells, you'll be taking Flash and Teleport, and some of your starter items are going to be a Doran's Blade into a Health Potion into a Stealth Ward. Your first back is probably going to be something like a Longsword into Basic Boots, and the core items that you're going to be focused on, you can be getting these around the 20-minute mark. That's going to be Eclipse, Plated Steel Caps, and the Black Cleaver. Now to finish out that build, you typically will go something like a Death Dance, Sterix Gauge, and a Spear of Shojin. The Shojin is going to be great for that ability Haste to get more CDR on our abilities, and then Sterix Gauge and Death Dance is really going to help with your just sort of brawling capabilities, your fighting sustain, just to kind of keep you from getting bursted down. Now we do have some situational items just kind of depending on, what kind of comp you're against. If you're against an AP heavy comp, you can go something like a Maw into a Spirit Visage. If you're against something like a Mundo, a Soraka, or a Yumi, you can of course pick up something like a Kenpunt Chainsword. If you're wanting a little bit more burst damage, you could also go something like the Cyclo Sword. So this synergizes really well with any sort of champions that have like inbuilt stealth or mobility. And Ambessa does have a ton of different dashes, so she can proc this a whole bunch. Now just some sort of general tips and tricks with Ambessa. You want to try to keep the minion wave closer to your tower. If you're able to freeze the lane in front of your tower, this is going to allow you to kind of engage when you want, and this also kind of keeps you from being too vulnerable to the enemy jungler. And then before you do commit to an all-in, you want to check your energy bar first, because you don't want to commit to an all-in and not have your primary source of damage, your energy bar. And then final tip is Ambessa is a pretty good brawler, so she really benefits from extended trades. So if you are a little bit behind, you make sure you're not engaging on somebody who will be able to burst you down very quickly. So taking a look at her abilities, her passive is going to be her Drakehound Step. So when Ambessa casts an ability, issuing a move or attack order will cause her to dash after the ability finishes. Casting an ability also gives Ambessa a charge, which increases her attack range and speed. Attacks consume a charge and deal additional damage and restore energy. So this is where Ambessa's power really comes from, and all of her other abilities are really going to kind of synergize and kind of all loop back to her passive. She almost gets like a double attack with each ability that she casts, and it's one of the main reasons that we focus so much on ability haste, is because we want to be able to cast as many abilities as possible, and we want to be able to dash as much as we possibly can. So taking a look at her Q, her Cunning Sweep and Sundering Slam. So Ambessa sweeps her blades to form a semicircle, dealing extra damage to enemies at the edge. If you hit an enemy, it readies Sundering Slam. So this means we get to recast the ability, and then Ambessa is going to slam down her blades and deal bonus damage to the first enemy hit. So if you really think about it, she can Q, proc her passive, Q, proc her passive, and she gets a whole bunch of damaging abilities that can happen in a very quick succession. We also have her W ability, Repudiation. Ambessa gains a shield, braces herself, then slams the ground. If she braces herself from damage by an enemy champion, large monster, or structure, she does more damage with her slam. This means you typically want to have her W up before you are casting your slam through your Q ability. We have her E, Lacerate. Ambessa whips her chains in a circle, damaging and briefly slowing enemies. Using Drakehound Step will trigger an additional strike. So you can kind of use this as your engage. So of course this will slow, and if you do combine this with your passive Drakehound Step, you will get that additional strike. And finally, we have our ultimate Public Execution. So this has both a passive and an active effect. So the passive effect, Ambessa gains armor penetration and her abilities healer, and then the active effect, Ambessa becomes unstoppable and blinks to the furthest enemy champion in a line. She suppresses the target before slamming them for damage and a stun. So once you do get out of lane and you do get level 6, Public Execution will act more as your engage rather than your E ability. This is kind of what gives her that assassin feel, right? You just target the furthest enemy away from you, which is typically a carry, you can dash to them and you can just kind of burst them down. Okay, let's talk about some of her strengths and weaknesses, starting out with the strengths. So just kind of like we talked about, she can really isolate an enemy champion in a team fight. You can basically just ult right on top of a carry, and if you can do that consistently, you can pretty much carry any sort of team fight. So you can become very snowbally if you are able to abuse this. So if you need somebody who can kind of lock down a target, especially in a team fight, Ambessa is one of the perfect champions to do that. Now, some of the weaknesses is this can be a little bit difficult if you're unable to freeze the lane, because it's kind of hard to engage on somebody in lane because she doesn't have that many ways to really slow somebody down. She doesn't have much CC. She doesn't have a specific way to really lock a target down. So you have to sort of be able to chase them back to their turret and kill them before they get back. Another weakness is she's pretty difficult to play. You're going to have to put in a lot of games to play her effectively. And she's just mechanically challenging to play. Then the final weakness is, while she does have a ton of all-in potential, and this is great when you are ahead. However, if you are a little bit behind and you ultimate in and you get on that enemy carry, you are going to be very vulnerable. So if you are going all in like that, you do want to ensure that your team can follow you up, or you're going to be putting yourself in a 1v5 sort of situation. Let's talk about how to sort of play her between the early game, mid game, and late game. So early game, right, you want to make sure that the enemy is pushing into your tower. You want to freeze directly in front of your tower so you can kind of chase them down back to their turret. If you do get kind of behind and you can no longer fight your laner, typically what we probably recommend to do is roam mid lane, try to get a kill or two from mid, and then try to reapproach your lane, catch up on some farm, and get into the mid game. And in the mid game, you do want to probably be split pushing. You want to try to apply pressure around the map. So typically you want to push into the enemy turret tier 2 and then try to start taking their top and bottom, your enemy junglers camps. This is going to be one of the main ways that you can get ahead into the mid game. Now in the mid game and team fights, you're not to your extremely tanky stage yet. So really what you want to be doing is you're not going to be doing a whole bunch of frontlining. What you really want to be doing is kind of focusing on the enemy ADC and kind of engaging on them. Try and catch them out. Try to just be annoying as you can to either the enemy mid, the enemy ADC, anybody squishy that you can kind of lock onto. But you only want to be doing this if you can ensure that your team's going to kind of follow you up in that. But that is sort of your main role in the mid game, is you kind of play more as an assassin rather than a tank. Now in the late game, that does sort of shift a little. You do become very tanky in the late game. So late game is going to be considered the 25+ minute mark. And this is kind of where you don't want to be split pushing quite as much. You want to be grouping with your team. And Ambessa is a really good engaged champion. So if you do see that your team has a number advantage, say it's a 4-on-3, you just saw 2 people recall, this is a great time to just go in and engage that fight. So late game, you're really focused more on soaking damage for your team and engaging good fights. Now let's go ahead and quickly talk about her power spikes. So at level 3 and 4, she's going to have access to all of her abilities. So this is a great time to look for a skirmish. Her next power spike is obviously going to be at level 6 when she gets her ultimate. However, her ultimate is not super strong for 1v1s. It can be useful to secure kills early, but for the most part, her main power spikes are going to be around 3 and 4. Now, another good time to engage early game is going to be if you are able to complete your first item before the enemy laner. Go ahead and engage, get on top of them, and you can probably win that trade just through itemization alone. In the mid game, you do get a little bit more power through your Q ability now that you kind of have it maxed out. So that is a great time to look and trade. Then at level 11, you get another point into your ultimate. So at this point is kind of when you're looking to group and engage in those big team fights with Ambessa. So around level 11, when you get 2 items fully completed, that's going to be the point where you need to try and go in and engage. And then not much changes going into the late game. Your next power spike is going to be, of course, at level 16 when you get your final point into your ultimate, and you're really looking to, again, catch people who are out of place. That's one of her main strengths, is her engage. So that's what you really want to play around. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. And if you also want to support the channel, we do have a Patreon link in the description of the video. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next one.